All right. Welcome everybody to the Cruel Philosopher podcast. I am your host, the Cruel Philosopher, and today is a special episode. I have somebody on today who I have been a big fan of his work for some time now. Um, his name is Jeff Charles. Now, Jeff, I let people introduce themselves because I don't know how they want to be perceived by the world. So I'm gonna let you at least give a quick background about who you are and what you think that people should know about yourself.
My name is Jeff Charles. I am a political commentator and a journalist. Been doing this for about 5 or 6 years or so. I'm a contributor for redstate.com. That's where I do a lot of my writing. I also contribute to Newsweek Opinion. I have my own podcast called A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. And I also have a Substack called Chasing Liberty. So I'm excited to be here. I love talking about all these topics.
Thank you so much. So I didn't say this before, but I think the first time I kind of got an idea of who you were, I read your articles first,
Oh,
from
okay.
what you was writing, and you don't really pay attention to who the author is. You see an article on Twitter, you click it, that's a great article, right? Then
Yeah.
you read a couple, and you're like, I wonder who this, Jeff Charles a person is. Then I saw you on uh the panel with Hotep Jesus that he had. It was Hotep Jesus, it was you, Uncle Hotep, Sonny Johnson, Jason Whitlock. And I thought it was
Oh, okay.
yeah, I thought it was a
Yeah.
great conversation. I think it was like what is a coon? Something like that.
Yeah.
I was,
That was a lot of fun.
I was like, that was a great conversation. I was like, oh no, this, and I feel like your voice is a voice that needs to be heard. Because I feel like with the gatekeeping that happens on both the right and the left, as far as media personalities go, mainstream news, mainstream media, somebody like yourself who is critical of everybody
Hmm.
is the people we need to be actually, following, especially those of us that aren't as knowledgeable about politics as people like yourself. And I think you do very important work in that respect.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I tend to offend people on both sides, which tells me I'm doing something right.
Yeah. So I guess my first question would be, how did you get involved in politics? Like, did you grow up in a political family? Were you a part of the crowd where like a specific event happened and then you got into politics?
Mm.
Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, so when I was younger, I mean, I've always kind of paid attention to politics. I wasn't too deeply into politics. But what really woke me up was 9/11. And that's when I really started to pay attention and I became kind of a political junkie. And that's kind of what started my evolution over the years. I mean, back then, we were having the war on terror, which got me curious about a lot of other stuff that was happening in and outside the country. And I just started really paying more attention to what was going on in our country. I didn't understand a whole lot about politics. I didn't really even understand political ideology. Like I knew there
Mm.
were Democrats and Republicans. I hadn't really, I'd heard the word conservative, but I didn't really know what it was. I had maybe heard the word libertarian, didn't really know what that was. But as I continued to develop and started to listen to a lot of different commentators, I used to listen to a lot of talk radio because I had a job where I drove a lot. And that's kind of where I realized that as far as beliefs go, I align more with the right than with the left. But even that evolved. I mean, and then that's when I started going more libertarian to a lot of these things, just because I see what the government does and how corrupted it has become and how really both parties are trash. And it's been quite a wild ride. And then in 2016, I had been uh, doing like content marketing. I used to do a lot of writing on the side because I had a day job, and I was doing it to just have another way to make money. And I'm good at writing, so I was doing that. But then I really wanted to see if there was a way I could write about politics and get paid for it. And it's not always easy to get into, but I kind of magically fell into it. I
Mm.
saw an ad on a site called Upwork that wanted political conservative writers. And so I applied and I made it there. And that's where I really got my start in 2017. And so fast forward to now, I've gone fully into this world. I quit my day job a few years ago, and I do this full time.
That's incredible. It's always interesting hearing like what event got you into politics, because for me, it was so it started with man, I'm forgetting his name. George Zimmerman, the young man that
Trayvon
lost his
Martin.
life. Trayvon Martin for me.
Yeah.
And I was still back in high school. Like I turned 30 this year, and
Oh, okay.
so I was really young, but not really knowing what happened. Then I remember the Mike Brown shooting in Ferguson was when I was really, dipping my toe into politics, and kind of the same journey you had. I started on the liberal side, like, which is not shocking for most young people, right?
Right. Right.
So I was, and I mean, I was out there. I remember us marching across like the bridge in New York City, during that
Oh, wow.
time. Yeah, I was out, and just from then to now, seeing how I've gone from like a liberal to like uh I don't even know where I will fall these days either. So it's so interesting hearing, you talk. I've heard of the Libertarian Party, as well. I think it's very interesting. I'm probably somewhere in between conservative and libertarian, if I'm being honest. But yeah, so seeing kind of how, events can really push you, politically one way or the other is really interesting. So I guess so just kind of digging into the topic, I told you today I want to talk about African Americans and kind of our relationship with both parties, right?
Right.
And Black people, before we proceed, I just want to make one quick, kind of like just some context for the conversation. When I say Black people, I'm talking specifically about like descendants of slaves. Like ADOS, right? So I know Black can mean different things to different people. So
yes.
I'm talking, about a very specific group of people. Black people are not liberal.
Nope.
At all. Like, I mean, we just got on the gay stuff like 5-10 years ago. Like, we were way behind everybody else when it came to like, gay marriage and things of that nature. So I would say in the Democratic Party, we are, and there's a bunch of studies and evidence that shows we're like the most conservative voting bloc of the Democratic Party. We used to vote Republican. What happened?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting story. I mean, and on both sides you have narratives about this, right? And both are, it gets some right, but mostly wrong. If you're coming from the right, conservatives will tell you that Black people voted for Republicans, and then FDR came along with his New Deal offering free stuff, and then Black people just started migrating over. There's a lot more nuance to it than that. This kind of ignores what the Republican Party did after Reconstruction. So here's what actually happened. I mean, Black people were very much a part of the Republican Party. I believe that in Texas, back in those times, at one point, Black people made up like 80 to 90% of the Texas state Republican Party. That party and the Black community were very much intertwined. But then you had this movement come around where the Republicans wanted to be seen more as a national party rather than just a Northern party. And they wanted to start appealing more to the South to expand their influence. And in so doing, they really wanted to appeal to the more racist sentiments among racist white Southerners back right after Reconstruction. Democrats had already had a foothold there. But Democrats were also looking to become a national, more of a national party as well to keep their influence. So this brought about the creation of what's called the Lily White movement in the Republican Party. And this movement was basically saying, we want to make this a party more for white people. We don't want Black people to be as involved. And they systematically started gaining more influence in the GOP and systematically removing Black people from their positions. They started trying to alienate the Black community. So they started pushing us out. And meanwhile, there was other movements that wanted to stay with Black people. So they pushed back against the lily white movement. This was also happening in the Democratic Party. There were people who were saying, we don't want to just appeal to racist whites. We want to get more Black votes too. We want to get more Black support as well. So they had that tension there as well. And what happened is that the lily white movement ended up winning. They ended up winning that. And so when FDR came around, when progressives really started to get more involved in the Black community and spreading their ideology, you had the Republicans who were systematically trying to alienate Black people. And, it's interesting because when FDR came around, they had the New Deal and all that. Black people were like, okay, well, they're offering something to help us improve our conditions. They were still dealing with Jim Crow and the after effects of slavery, still a lot of discrimination, still a lot of violence, and a lot of Black people were struggling. And the Republicans didn't come with anything. They didn't say, okay, FDR has this New Deal, which is trash, but here's what we're going to do to help uplift the Black community. They didn't do anything like that. So that's really where the migration kind of intensified, because it had already started before that because of the lily white movement. And so when that started taking place, that's when you start seeing more of the history there. But Republicans there were still Republicans who were still trying to make Black people more a part of the party. When Eisenhower ran the first time, I think he got maybe like 20-30% of the Black vote, but one of his advisors, E. Frederick Morrow, was saying for his second term, when he was running for his second term, he was saying, we really got to start reaching out to Black people. You really need Black support. Eisenhower said, okay, we'll start trying. We'll start campaigning in Black communities, and we'll have our liaisons go out there and everything like that. And he got a little less than, I think, 40% of the Black vote back then. So there were some that were still trying. But by the 60s, when Goldwater came around, he basically put a whole stop to it. He basically said there's no reason for us to reach out to the Black community. We're never going to get their votes. He relied on a lot of racist marketing, which is interesting because he had been involved with the NAACP previously in Arizona. And so he basically put the dagger in the heart of Republican Black outreach. Nixon after him did a little bit. He had some, but after Nixon, I don't think any Republican president broke 20% in the Black vote, and it's only gone down since, because at that point they're just like, we're just not going to reach out to these people anymore. We're just going to court white voters. So that's kind of what happened. So the anti-Black faction of the Republican Party won out back then, and in the Democratic Party they lost. So that's why you see Democrats making more overtures towards Black people throughout the history. Now, I'm not saying that it's because they love Black people. That's not why, but that is what happened.
I was just about to say.
Yeah, then you had LBJ, Great Society. I mean, everybody knows his comments that it wasn't because they loved us, but they wanted the support.
I feel like basically what you're saying is that Democrats saw a use for us more so than Republicans did. So it wasn't love, but it was more so like where Republicans should have said, hey, there's a use for these people. They didn't even do that. Versus Democrats at least was like, oh, well, we can make these people useful for our political goals. And it's crazy to hear that a Republican at any point in time got like 30% of the Black vote. You can't even like think about that now.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess so now, is that why it's so hard for Republicans to get the Black vote now? Meaning, because of that history, because I keep saying Republicans, if I was like in charge of the Republican Party, I would spend all of my money on one thing, and that is I would hire all types of marketing people, all types of social engineer, and I would give them one task: convince Black people that we don't hate them. Right? Like, I think that is the only thing that is really keeping Black people tied to the Democratic Party, because we are not like the rest of the coalition. Like
Right.
we're not really down with the socialism stuff. We're not down. The only thing you hear is, but the Republicans are racist as hell. So if I was in charge of like the Republican Party, I would literally spend all my money on just fix this problem here, and we'll take step number 2 after we deal with that one. I guess I would ask you, A, do you see where I'm coming from, and B, why aren't they doing that? Because and before you go, they need us. Like in 2023, I would say Blacks need Republicans and Republicans need Blacks, as far as like a mutual relationship for either one, because I think Black people are in trouble. So for either of these two groups to actually make it, you know, for the next 20 years, I think we need each other.
So yeah, so the way I mean, and that's kind of how I used to approach it, but I mean, I've basically seen that both parties aren't different enough. I know. I'm still gonna speak within what you're saying, but within your framework. I mean, because the idea is that Black people would have more political power if both parties were fighting over them, right? Right now, they're not. So Democrats can basically do whatever the hell they want because they know they're going to get the votes no matter what. And going back to your other point, you know, you're right. Black people are not progressive, so-called. We're not socialist. To speak to that, there was a Pew Research survey that came out, I think 2 or 3 years ago, and 80% of Black people identified as either moderate or conservative. The rest identified as liberal. And so that would maybe be more of what we call progressive today. But still, most Black people, I mean, and I can't tell you how many Black people who I've talked to who said, you know what, I agree with a lot of what conservatives say. I agree with a lot of what Republicans say they believe, but I don't feel like I have a place in that party. I feel like I wouldn't be welcome there. And there are reasons to believe that. I mean, you have a lot of influencers who say things that antagonize Black people. You have a lot of Black influencers on the right who use their platforms to denigrate the Black community without telling the full truth. But the main thing, though, the main reason why the Republicans have been successfully painted as racist is because they just stopped showing up. So like I said, around the 60s, I mean, if you're not showing up in the communities and you're not actually talking to Black people, then yeah, I mean, it's easier to paint you as racist. Like say, the example I always use, if you have a white Republican friend and you've, you know, had dinner with them, you know, your families have spent time together, and then CNN comes out and says that person is racist, well, you're going to know it's BS. Why? Because you spent time with them. You're like, no, that guy's not racist. I had him over for dinner last night. Like, that's the analogy that I use. That's why it's been so easy to paint Republicans as racist, because they don't show up. They're not really trying to address Black issues. They're not speaking to Black people. They'll talk about Black people, but they won't speak to Black people. And to give an example, I mean, if they did, they would get more of the vote. It wouldn't matter. The example that I always give is Governor Mike Huckabee. So I interviewed him a few years ago. When he had to run for his next term as governor, he got 50% of the Black vote. Half of the Black people in Arkansas voted for a lily white Republican, a white man. Why? And so I said, how did you do it? And he said, well, how'd you get the votes? How'd you get 50% of the Black vote? He said, well, I asked for it. You know, he did the work before it was even time to get re-election. He went into Black communities. He visited with Black leaders, Black clergy members. He spoke at Black churches. He listened to what they had to say. He listened to what their issues were. He broke bread with them, and he wasn't always well received. But as he kept doing it, as he kept building those relationships, he got that result. And he even told me, like, I went to the Republican Party and I said, hey, look, I got 50% of the Black vote. This is what we need to be doing, and here's how to do it. And they blew him off. So that goes to the second part of your question. Republicans, I think there's a few different reasons why they don't try to reach Black voters. One is there is a racist segment in the Republican Party.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there is a racist segment in the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
The racism looks different, but this is where you have to watch what Malcolm X said about the white liberal and the white conservative back when he was around. The Democrats cloak their racism and they hide it much better. Republicans, not so much. Now, I believe that most Republicans and most Democrats are not racist, but there is racism in both parties. So I think that's part of it. The other is that, and I think this is the main reason, they really don't believe that they can reach Black voters. They think all hope is lost. And a lot of them don't even know what to do. They're like, I have had so many conservatives ask me, well, how do we talk to them? I'm like, well, you're talking to me right now, right? That's how you talk to Black people. Yeah, there are some cultural, things that you have to watch out for, just like you would if you were talking to anybody. But the key point is showing up, but they don't think that they can win. They don't want to expend their resources because Republicans tend to be more short-term thinkers rather than long-term. So they don't like the idea that they're going to have to take some L's at first, even if they're reaching out to Black communities. You're not going to start winning right away. It has to be a long-term focus. They're not willing to do that.
The last point you said about Republicans being short-term versus long-term, I think they say that as an excuse with the Black outreach because they can think long-term on things like abortion. Like they play the long-term abortion game, right? Just, chess piece here, chess piece here, chess piece here. Then they got the stars aligned, and feel how you want about Trump, but he delivered on by putting those Supreme Court justices where they got their moment. And so they were willing to play the long game there, which is why I'm not buying that they can't play the long game when it comes to Black people.
Yeah.
It's like an excuse to me.
Well, they can, but they choose not to.
Yeah, exactly. Now, playing devil's advocate, I think what they would say is kind of to your point that they genuinely don't think it's worth going after. And in 2023, are they wrong? Meaning, and I was saying before, like, I feel like Republicans need Black people, and I think Black people need Republicans. But in 2023, especially, when you look at the demographic shifts in the country right now, and I was saying the reason why I think Black people are in trouble is because if I am a Republican, I can make a strong argument that it is more worth your money. Like you get more of a bang for your buck if you went after Asians and Hispanics over Black people right now because of the demographics of the country. And those two groups are more open because they don't have the same history with the Republican Party. You don't have to kind of cut through those same, you don't have to convince Hispanics that you don't hate them. You don't have to convince Asians. Even if you do, you don't have to convince them of it. Versus you have to do a lot of digging for, convincing Black people that, hey, we're not your enemy.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, and I've had that point raised before. And the thing is, I mean, even in the past few years, you have seen, an uptick of minorities, of Black people, Hispanic, Asians voting for Republicans. Now, it's not the mass exodus that they made it sound like, but I think a lot of it is dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party. The thing is that even if Hispanics might be more amenable to the Republican Party, if Republicans really want to dominate politically, they still need Black voters for two reasons. One, it's still a significant voting bloc, and I don't think it's ever going to get to a point to where it's not. I mean, I think somebody calculated that they got 10% more or 15% more, Republicans would win more elections. But the other part of that is that it's not just that winning Black votes is important, but if you actually start caring about Black people, if you actually start reaching out to Black people, if you can shed that racist label, you're also going to get more white voters. You're also going to get more Hispanics there too. Because I think, and that kind of brings up another element in this equation. Okay. Because even though Republicans hadn't been really reaching out to Black voters, they still tried to make it look like they were, right? So, because they would have like, under Bush, we had this black outreach plan and blah, 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 blah. And the people who were running it, I think, were sincere, but they weren't getting any support. They were just a figurehead. You know, you've got certain black conservative influencers who make it sound like, oh, we're going to bring more black people over to the Republican Party because it's part of the veneer. Yeah, we want black voters, but they just won't vote for us because they're just on that Democratic plantation and they can't think for themselves. But we're trying. But the bottom line, yeah. But the bottom, yeah. Yeah, and there was a book that I read, and I can't remember the name of the author, but it kind of talks about this history. A lot of that, I believe, is to make white voters more comfortable with voting for Republicans because they don't want to vote for a party that is perceived as racist. But if they can make it look like they're trying to get black voters, then they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe they're maybe not as racist as I thought. But the problem is that they're not trying to get the votes. But if they did, if they actually showed, like Trump did, I mean, this is where I'll give Trump some credit. He actually went after the black vote, especially when he was running the second time around. He spoke directly to the black community and he said, I want your votes. And he increased his vote, especially among black men. Yeah. So I think that that's another reason why Republicans need to reach out to black people more, to get more black people on board, but also to get more people who might not be as comfortable voting for a party that is seen as racist.
So, so what you said about Republicans having horrible black conservative mascots, because like Candace Owens is like, yeah, like because like I and just to be perfectly transparent, I don't have like hatred towards Candace Owens. Like I don't hate her, sure, right? But I said a couple of things about Candace Owens, right? And I got a lot of pushback on TikTok. You know, people was calling, and I was saying, Candace would have been better off if she married a black man. And here's why, right?
Okay.
I said, you can't be talking about people like this, but you lay with who you lay with. Fair or not fair, it's not going to come across well. Like she talks, like you said before, a lot of, the black conservatives, they'll talk about black people, but they won't talk to black people. And to Candace's credit, she did that Revolt thing, and I think that took balls, where she was, up there with like T.I. and
yeah, she did well with that. Yeah,
and like I said, that took a lot of guts, because you're going into like an away game, like this is not kind of your audience, but she talks a lot about black people, and a lot of black people dismiss Candace Owens, right? And you don't help yourself, from my perspective, when you talk and what some people will say very derogatory about black people. Then you marry this white guy, and like you surround yourself around white people. It doesn't come across well, whether it's fair or not. It's like, I don't think Malcolm X would have been received well by the community, if he was walking around with a white woman on his arm, right? When you look into a lot of the black conservatives, have non-black partners. And once again, I believe people should be able to be with whoever they want to be with. But if we're talking about politics, like, to say these things don't matter is a lie.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought up Malcolm X, because I was going to bring him up in relation to this. But before I do that, I think it's a little deeper than that. I think that they could probably get away with having white spouses, because there's a lot of prominent black Democrats who have white spouses. Kamala Harris is one of them. Mm-hmm. But the difference, though, is that people like Candace Owens and others, they don't really speak to it. They'll, like I said before, they'll talk about black people, but they won't speak to black people. And on top of that, most of their platform and messaging about the black community is denigrating. It relies on a lot of untrue stereotypes, negative stereotypes. It relies on half-truths. I mean, both parties tell half-truths. If you put those truths together, now you got the truth. But there's the half that the conservatives will talk about, and they'll only talk about how horrible the black community is, how horrible black culture is. I mean, you can't make those criticisms, but only in front of a white audience. I mean, even the whole Blexit thing, Yeah, I called it Wexit because it was mostly white people that showed up to it. And I have no problem with people talking about these issues with white people because, I mean, if we're going to move forward, they got to be involved in the process. But going back to Malcolm, Malcolm criticized the Black community all the time. He criticized stuff about the culture. He said, y'all are spending your money with these white businesses. Y'all need to be doing this within our own communities. He had some very stern rebukes. He said, if you still vote for Democrats and Republicans, you are a traitor to your race. So he was very harsh. But the difference is that all the Black people that he spoke with knew that he loved his community. They knew that his rebukes came from a place of love because he was speaking to them. He was trying to call on them to do better. He spent most of his time trying to make that happen. You don't see that with a lot of these Black conservative influencers. They don't do what Malcolm did. They're not involved in the community like that. I mean, I think if Candace were more present on stuff like Revolt and Black media, then that message might come better. And if she told more of the truth, I think that message would come better, even if she has a white spouse. But the thing is, that's not what their objective is. Their objective is to put on a show and to basically convince white conservatives that they can't reach Black voters, or if they can't reach them, it's not because of anything that Republicans are doing. It's because Black people are brainwashed or what have you. So I think that's really playing into a lot of it.
Yeah. No, yeah. And I said Candace Owens' name because she's kind of the first person that came to mind, but she's not the only one. You have like, Brandon Tatum, you have like, a lot of these guys. And like you said, where I agree with Candace is a lot of her criticism, because I'm very critical of Black culture, right? Because I think in 2023, I've always said it's not that racism does not exist. It does exist, obviously. But I think the main culprit, I've said, like, the Black community, I think, needs like a triage, right? So you know how, like, if a big accident happens, a bunch of people get hurt, and there's one hospital, what they do is, okay, who has the most severe injuries? We're gonna work on that, right? If somebody got shot, but they sprained their ankle, you stop the bleeding. You don't worry about the ankle. And Black culture, Black people, to me, I think, yes, there's racism, but I think we have kind of adopted very, very bad cultural practices. And for me, I view that as a positive, because culture, you can turn around culture very quickly.
Yeah.
Culture changes, every like decade pretty much, right? And so it gives me kind of a hopeful outlook, and sometimes, because I'm like, well, I think these are cultural problems that we have. But this means if we kind of, make some tweaks here or there, we can kind of, change our trajectory in a really positive manner. Versus if I believe these things are like, just all, racism, well, that's a really, really hard problem, for us to fix.
Sure.
And so, like you said, it's like, but it's not like hopeful when you hear from like Black conservatives. It's not like, this is like, what y'all doing is crazy, but we can do, like, with Malcolm, it's like the criticism, but look how far we've come though, as well, right? Like, Black people have a very unique history in this country. I even hate when they compare us to immigrants. It's like, well, no, because blacks didn't travel to America, like these other groups. We are the descendants of people that were brought here, which is totally different context. You have slavery. We survived that. We survived Jim Crow, and so if you kind of put it in that package, I think more people would be like, well, you know what, they're right. We have some cultural stuff that we have to work on, but we can make these changes. And I don't think most of the Black conservatives that Republicans think are helping them, they ain't helping.
Right.
Yeah, they ain't helping. Okay, so now let's look at the Democratic side, right? So we acknowledge that, part of the reason why Blacks, are so devoted to the Democratic Party is because of how little the Republican Party does to actually genuinely go after the Black vote. Got you. I want to ask you, what is going on though when you look at, and I've been saying for a while that there's this thing going on between the Black community and like the Black elite, where because even within the Democratic Party, you'll have the Black elite advocate and promote certain things that when you kind of look into the numbers, the Black community is saying the opposite, right? The easiest example is like police.
Yep.
Right. When you you look at you know, police and, you know, police brutality, and then there's always this conversation about, you know, oh, we need to, you know, take police out of the community, right? You hear this about the Black elite, you know, doing the Breakfast Club and Charlemagne and all these people, and then you look into the numbers, and you'll see, oh wait, most Black people want to maintain the level of police that they have in their community, right? A small fraction want more, but the smallest are people who want to go the other way.
Yep.
So how come what most Black people want doesn't get talked about on the Democratic side, but it's only the Black elite that get to decide these policies that go against? And how come the Black elite are advocating for policies that go against what most Black people want?
Because they are everything that they accuse Black conservatives of being. They're tap dancers. I mean, they are. I mean, you got Black conservatives who tap dance, you got Black progressives who tap dance, and they are placed in those positions by white progressives to spout their message, just in the exact same way. That's why there's this disconnect. If you are a Black elite, if you grew up in opulence, or if you grew up in a certain level of wealth, and you went to all these high-profile universities, you got inculcated with progressive ideology, so you come out believing that, but you're not as in touch with what's going on the ground. It's one, like, you look at the Black Lives Matter organization, you've got the Global Foundation, which is corrupt, which is a whole grift, nothing good about it. But then you also have the local chapters who are actually doing good work. I may disagree with a lot of their politics, but I'm not going to have a problem with people going out there feeding the homeless, fighting against government abuse. I'm all for that. So, but again, that's what, like if you watch MSNBC or even in Black media in general, you don't see as many Black moderates on those shows being the host or whatever. They might have on some guests and stuff like that, but in general, they're pretty far to the left. And it wasn't always like that, but I mean, but in a lot of it, in a lot of ways, in a lot of the radio shows in Black media, you've got more of a far left progressive taint to it. And there's a reason for that, because they want to, again, give the veneer that they actually care about our issues when they really don't. If Black people are telling you that they want police in their neighborhoods, but they just don't want those officers to be able to abuse their authority, then that's what you should be listening to. You shouldn't be saying, okay, well, let's just have fewer police and that'll take care of the problem. Or, you know, let's have these ridiculous bail reform policies, which, by the way, I'm for bail reform, but having to where you're letting violent people out when they've committed 5 violent felonies already. And who are they victimizing? They're victimizing Black people. When you want to go soft on crime, but Black people are being disproportionately impacted by crime rates, then yeah, you're out of touch, which again, it means to me, you don't care. And at a certain point, you're doing it on purpose. Because if you've been doing this for 60 years, because Democrats haven't controlled Black communities for decades. They didn't just get in charge. They've been controlling our neighborhoods for decades. Not a whole lot has changed. In a lot of ways, it's gotten worse. At a certain point, if you're still trying to do the same thing, you're doing it on purpose. Like I that's where I put my tinfoil hat on. I'm like, no, you can't be this. I give them too much credit. You can't possibly be this stupid.
You are kind of, yeah, because I separate them into like 2 groups, right? I think they're like, there's one group of the Black elite who I think the reason why they advocate for these policies, even though most Black people don't want it, is because, like you said, they're out of touch, right? They mean well, I think. Right? So
yeah,
they're not malicious, but here's what we get into. Like the most pro-Black progressives, if you ask them where they live, right, and they move as far away from Black people as possible, right? Like all of them. You be like, oh, where you live at? Nope. Like, and it's on purpose, right? And so it's like, okay, well, you're not going to be impacted by any of these things you're proposing, right? If this goes bad, if removing the cops from this middle class black neighborhood goes bad, you're not going to be impacted at all because you live in this other community where the cops come around a lot, and if we're being honest, you got them on speed dial too.
Yep.
So let's be clear here. And then there's that other group, like you're saying, are the ones that I just have to believe you know what you're doing. And this is why I have such a problem with people like Al Sharpton, right? Like Al, I feel like Al is what happens when kind of the true black leaders get taken out. And you have this because he was kind of trying to find a way to say this. He wasn't a part of the friend group. He was like the cousin of somebody that was in the friend group, right? So Al Sharpton was around, right? But we kind of knew who the kind of the real black, and like, even if you disagree with somebody like Martin Luther King Jr., I'm not a socialist, right? I think his economic proposals would do more damage to the community than would help. But I could tell he was genuine.
Yeah.
I can tell that he had the best interest of black people, but also all Americans as well, right?
Yeah.
Because before his death, of course, he was kind of moving more into a kind of a coalition between all working class
Right.
Americans, right? And but with Al, it's like I look at Al, I see his personal enrichment. I don't see like the connection to the community, and I think that also leads into kind of my bigger frustration with like the black church, where you have this thing where black churches, and I'm an organist, so I'm in these churches, and you like how they allow themselves to be like speaking platforms for Democratic politicians who only come around when it's time to vote during these elections, right? Local elections or what have you. And the black church kind of, allows them to come in and, tell black people, hey, this is who we're voting for here. We don't see them again. We don't have conversations about, hey, this person just voted for this bill here that is really harming us. There, we don't have any of those conversations. And Al Sharpton, to me, is the worst of both of those things. The black elitist, who is also a representation of what I think is the black church pimping their people out to the Democratic Party.
Yeah, no, you're right. My friend Darvio, he's in Ohio, and he does a lot of work with the local Republican Party. He was helping like a candidate with their campaign, and some of the stuff he told me has like blew my mind. Like the Democratic machine is so entrenched in these communities that they're able to wield a tremendous amount of influence for policies and measures that don't actually help black people. And he told me, like, behind the scenes, some of these black progressives will straight up admit what they're doing. They were saying, hey, this is how I get the bag, whatever. If they don't like these policies, they shouldn't be voting for them, but you're still pushing them. I mean, but he even told me a story about in this past election cycle about how they would use these black churches, and they had this black pastor convention where these Democratic operatives basically said, this is the message that we want you to tell to your congregations about their agenda and all that stuff. And so they have the pastors basically still preach that to their congregation, and then you get a lot of these policies that don't really help. And in a lot of areas, these churches are dependent on the local government for their funding because tithes have gone down. So it's a very tricky, very
nasty
and very clever.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I recognize the game. It's insidious, it is sinister, it is evil, but they played this very well. That's yet another reason why Republicans would have a hard time breaking through to black communities. Doesn't mean that they couldn't, but it goes really deep, to the point to where if you're a black person and you're a political consultant and you want to work with people's campaigns, you have to work with the Democrats. You just have to find the most conservative Democrat that you can, because if you dare to work for a Republican, and that Republican, especially if that Republican loses, you're blackballed. You work
Yeah,
with a Republican. You tried to help a Republican, you're blackballed, which means you're not gonna be able to do your job, you're not gonna be able to eat, you're not gonna be able to feed your families. It's a whole intricate web of just political I don't know what the word I want to use
no,
is.
no, and it's kind of why, like I said, like I'm an organist, and I'm inside of a lot of black churches, and but my beliefs are like totally separate from most, as you can imagine, black people, because I'm not a liberal, not a progressive. Even when I'm at work, and I uh, uh, this something strange has happened where before me and my pops was talking, and he would say, "Yo, man, like because my pops is in his mid 60s." And he's like,
Mhm.
yeah, your generation, like when I was growing up, like we just didn't talk about like politics and stuff at work. Like y'all would talk about all of this stuff, at work. And he's right, because even in my job, we'll talk about politics and stuff at work. And I realized, yeah, like I'm I'm not of these people. Like I'm not a liberal. I live in New York City,
Right.
and it's Blue Haven. And the craziest thing that happens to you, right? Back when Trump won in 2016, I was working at a luxury theater down in Manhattan, and I remember like this white lady came in, she's talking about, right. And when people assume your politics because of
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've been able to cover a lot of Black Lives Matter marches as a conservative without anybody saying anything.
it's so funny. Like she's like, yeah, oh yeah, I can't believe that Donald Trump, and she was really passionate. I'm like, oh wow, this woman thinks that you know because I'm black, like
Yeah.
that I must be like so distraught about this. When I was like, whatever, like Trump's in
Hmm.
office, what it is, what it is. One thing I want to ask you though, because you brought it up before, how Donald Trump was able to um appeal more than any other Republican to specifically black men,
Hmm.
right? Now, I don't know when it started to happen. I think it could have happened before 2016, but I think I started to hear it after 2016, or maybe I was just paying attention to it more, where the Democrats started to say this thing that black women were the backbone of the Democratic Party. And I thought that was
Mm.
interesting because, like, yes, black women vote at like a 98 clip for Democrats, but black men are right there at like 96 or 95 or 94, whatever it is. Like it's still like a high 90.
Right,
So I was like,
right.
th- there was there's no distinction that needs to be made between black men and black women. So it was just an odd thing for me to hear. Right. So thought nothing of it. Then years go by and you start hearing it more and more. That the black follow black women, black women are, and I was like, this is strange.
Hmm.
And then I was thinking, women outvote men in every demographic, white,
Right.
black, Hispanic. So it can't be that, because that's exists everywhere. But I'm only hearing this about black people, that
Mm.
black women are the backbone and black women lead, and black women are the moral authority. And you hear it now too, where people, uh, a lot of black elite will say, listen to black women or black women. Trevor Noah, when he signed off on his last episode, he was like, that he's had success in his career because he always listened to black women, and they'll let you know. And it's just been this weird thing going on. And I'm like, why is this? There's this thing on the left of kind of singling out black women separate from black men, even though we look at the voting patterns, like we're right there. Like now, there is this growing thing happening, but
Right.
that wasn't happening back when they started saying this thing that black women are the backbone of the Democratic Party, or maybe it was. What's happening here?
It seems to me like when I saw that whole thing going on, it was a lot of pandering. I mean, they wanted to make themselves look good. Oh yeah, we love black women. Yeah, we really respect black women. And I think they were just basically using black women to appeal to their base. I don't think that there was anything serious about it. But in a lot of ways, that kind of backfired, especially with Stacey Abrams. She was getting a lot of flack for not demeaning, but like diminishing the importance of black men.
Mhm.
And she tried to turn that around, but she did. I mean, she still got most of the black vote in general, but still, I think um, I think especially with black men, I mean, black men are very entrepreneurial. Um, we don't really need to rely on the 9 to 5, or we don't want to. I mean, I think a lot of black men would rather have their own companies, run their own businesses.
Like most
Republicans,
men.
huh?
Like most men. Just yeah, like black men are like
Yeah.
most men, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and Republican values appeal. Well, what Republicans say they believe appeals
Yeah.
appeals more to that, and so I think what's happening is that black men in particular are becoming more dissatisfied with the Democratic Party, and it's not that they were voting for Democrats because they love them so much. I think that black women are more likely to like the Democratic Party, but black men will just vote for them just because that they don't have a place. They don't believe they have a place in the Republican Party. But I think that this growing dissatisfaction, even among Hispanic men too,
Hmm.
is leading them to give Republicans a chance. And I think we saw that in these past midterm elections. So yeah, I think that Democrats love to pander, and they use black people and other marginalized groups to virtue signal in a way that they think is going to get them more support. So I think that's where the whole, it's all about black women came from.
But my thing is, here's what's confusing to me. If you were going to pander, why not just say black people? Because once again, I'm obsessed with this point because they don't do it with anybody else. Like they don't separate Hispanic women from Hispanic. They just say Latino or Hispanics.
Latinx.
Yeah, Latinx. With us though, they're doing this thing where they're kind of separating us by gender that I don't see them doing with other people, and that is strange to me. Like, why not just pander to black people like you do other communities? But with us, it's they're doing it by gender.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly why they're doing it that way. Maybe they believe that black women can be made to look more sympathetic, so it makes them look better by caring about them. I don't know what's going into this, honestly, because it is a little weird. But this stuff is all calculated, so I don't know what numbers they ran to say, hey, if we talk about black women and specifically, this might help us. Let's try it out. I don't think it's worked out all that well for them, but
Mhm.
there is a method to this madness, and it has nothing to do with caring about black women.
Yeah, and so at least we agreed that I'm like, there's something else going on.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is yet. And to your point, they have all of these, like they have numbers we don't even know about, like of what. But I'm trying to figure it out now. I do think one theory I have is because and blame is a strong word, so I'm not gonna say blame. I think black women are the ones that are kind of introducing a lot of this super liberal stuff into the
Yeah.
community, though. Like you look at Lizzo and how she's kind of, put on
Mhm.
this pedestal to, make obesity normal. She did I think she was in Nashville. She brought out all the drag queens.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. And black women are significantly more sympathetic to that stuff than black men are. I talk to black dudes all the time. They're like, this shit is
Yeah.
fucking weird. Like
Yeah.
they're like, when, and I said like, when did, like, drag queens have been around forever,
Yeah.
but when did they start being like Dr. Seuss and shit, wanting to read to
Right. Exactly.
like this stuff is strange to me, but black women seem to be more. So I think maybe that's one of the reasons why they're doing this putting black women on a pedestal, because they can introduce a lot of this other stuff into the community. And because men are so weak in general, it's not just a black thing. I think men are probably the weakest we've ever been at any point in history right now in America.
Mm.
We will go along with anything out of fear of women not liking what we have to say. Like dudes are so afraid to especially black dudes, right? Like it is hard to find a black woman who will like date you if she finds out you ain't really down with like the Democratic Party. And
Mm.
that I think that fear keeps, because there's a lot of men who are Republicans in the closet though. Like they'll never say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. You're right. You're right.
When they get in that booth, they'll vote, or when they're away from their wives or their girlfriends, and it's just boys, it's like you sound a lot different than when we around your girl. And so like there's a lot of black dudes that are just terrified. But to me, I think that's like, you're a coward. Like, if you see things that you think are despicable, as a man, you should say it. Be honest. You can be honest and empathetic at the same time, but speak your genuine mind on these issues. Exactly. And I think a lot of now I'm around black people, so I see it amongst black men, but I'm sure this is just as true among white men, and because like men generally speaking are not, like you said, we're like more into, listen, I want to be entrepreneur and economics. We vote a lot of economics. All this other stuff, men ain't really like obsessed with a lot of this other stuff. So that's been my theory. So we have like 8 minutes left, and I guess I want to end this here because as I've watched you evolve, where you used to be a lot more of a Republican, you are now a libertarian. And I find that to be interesting because as someone who is sympathetic to the Libertarian Party, I can't go all the way for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
Reason number one, I just don't believe in a two-party system it'll ever be viable. I think the best you could hope for is the Libertarian Party is big enough, like 5 to 10% of the electorate, where you can kind of bend the other two parties out of fear of you messing up a presidential election, whatever, and you can get them to concede certain which is very effective, to get certain policies. But I don't think it can ever be like a viable third party. Not because I think the party has bad ideas. I just think these two, like you said, they're so corrupt. Like they're talking about not having no debates, both of them. Like no presidential debates, and everyone talks about how Republicans are, anti-democracy. The Democratic Party, like, was out there back in 2016, keeping the Green Party off of voting slips, and I'm like, so that's
my Republicans do that to libertarians too, all the time.
Exactly, and so it's not that I think the party's bad. I think the system is just like a big swamp, and so I don't see it going anywhere. So, like, do you agree, or do you think there is a viable path for libertarians to be major players, moving forward?
Not at the national level, not anytime soon. No. My thing is, I was, even when I was focusing more on the Republican Party, my beliefs were always more libertarian. They have been so for years. It's funny because I had gone through some of my tweets, and even from 2019, I was saying, in a few years, I will probably go full anarchist because I actually knew I was probably going to get to this point. My focus was mainly on trying to add my voice to those trying to reform the GOP to make it live up to what it says it is, because they always run on a libertarian platform. Then they get into office and then they govern like Diet Democrats. So to me, that's because there is this debate in the liberty movement. Should we focus on our movement, or should we try to take over the GOP? I was more in the take over the GOP camp. And plus, back then, the Libertarian Party wasn't something that I could take seriously, because honestly, they didn't really take themselves all that seriously. But I always said, if I felt like there was something in the liberty movement where I felt like they actually had a plan, then I would probably jump ship. And that kind of happened last year. And so my thing is, it doesn't have to. People always focus on the federal, on national politics, because those are the sexiest, and that's what we've been conditioned to focus on. We don't focus as much on local, and for the past few years, I've been preaching you need to start focusing on your local politics, because that affects your life more than the president does. Chances are, if you get hassled by law enforcement, it's not going to be the FBI, it's not going to be the ATF, it's going to be your local sheriff's office or your local police officers. So for me, for the liberty movement to really start having political power, it's got to take a very long-term focus. So, and the Mises Caucus, which is a part of the Libertarian Party, recognizes this. And when I saw that they did, I was like, okay, that's where I can lend my voice. So nationally, yeah, they probably shouldn't be focusing as much on that. They should definitely be getting people on the ballot, because that helps their ballot access and on lower tickets, and it helps them to get their message out. but stop pretending like one day you're going to win the presidency or, or even a congressional seat. When you focus on your local races, if libertarians or liberty-minded people, regardless of the party, because to me it's not really about party, it's about liberty, it's about limiting the government, it's about making sure that the government can't abuse its citizens, that really starts at the local level. So if they start picking up more seats in city councils, county judge, sheriff, especially mayor, that's where we can start to see some change take place. When you have more of that, then you can bubble it more up to the state level, and maybe federal. But again, the federal government's gone. It is a corrupt beast, and to me, the only way to fix that is to just shut the whole thing down. But it's going to be a while before we get to that point. But still, you can still affect change at your local levels. You can also use local government as a bulwark against overreach coming from the federal and even the state level as well. You can nullify a lot of their laws. So I think that's the route that we have to go. And even relating this to the Black community, I mean, the government abuses us more than it does other people. I mean, that's just the fact.
Absolutely.
So when you have laws in place that allow them to do that, and you have a local government that will go along with those laws, it's never going to stop. So I think, to me, focusing locally over the long term, picking up as many local seats as we can over the next couple decades, if you have more liberty-minded people in those offices, then you can actually start pushing back against a lot of the overreach that we're seeing from the federal government. That's where I can see, I hesitate to use the word third party, but I mean, just for the conversation, that's where a third party can actually start making a difference. And plus, if you have more of these people governing and they're getting good results, that's also proof to people to say, hey, this concept works. We need more of this. So to me, that's the best shot we have. Now, I don't know if it's going to succeed, but I think that's our best shot right now.
I will say this, to your point, I do think the Libertarian Party has gotten respectable, because I used to watch those conventions. I'm like, Lord, put a suit on, man. Like I was like, this is so whack. Like, the whack jobs come out, but I do think they've gotten more serious recently. And so I agree with you there. As far as my own politics and why I do root for the Libertarian Party, I guess if I had to describe myself, I would describe myself as like almost like an anti-federalist of sorts. From like,
nice.
Like, I think that's the only way forward, really. Where I think the anti-federalists lost the battle, but I think they're winning the war long term. Of when they were saying, "Look, man, you can't govern." And we was a much smaller country back then. You can't govern this large mass of people with this federal government. And so I think what we need is to, like you said, go back to where states are pretty much their own countries, and we have free travel between the states, a shared currency, and a shared, defense, although limited. I think we spend way too much money on the on the military. I think that's the only thing that can actually save this country, and so that's why I do root for the Libertarians, because
I think you might be more of a libertarian, honestly.
Yeah,
I mean, going back to the Articles of Confederation, stuff like that. I mean, I'd rather see it all abolished, but I could probably settle for something like that. Like, or it's a loose confederation of different states, but the state is supreme. Yeah,
exactly. And so that's kind of what, if I had to describe myself, I know, anti-federalist doesn't mean anything in 2023, but when I kind of read those papers, and I'm like, man, these guys, I feel like they're talking to me right now.
Right.
Right now. Yeah. So super last question, then we're definitely out of here. I wanted to ask you, just because you talked about how, within the Republican Party, you have like some, pundits that are kind of like trying to bring Black people in, and some people that are you think that are counterproductive. Immediately comes to my mind is like Maj Toure versus Matt Walsh. That that kind of dynamic. And I've been saying for a while, I think Black men and white men are like, we like, I think our fates are tied together, if I'm being honest with you. Like, I think we have the same problems. Like, do you think we'll ever get over the race stuff?
It's going to take a while. What it's going to take is enough people realizing that the race stuff is designed for a specific purpose. What we're seeing right now is not organic. This is not a natural occurrence. This was manufactured by the elites on both sides. When we're at each other's throats, then we're not paying attention to what our government is doing. When we view each other as black and white and team red and team blue, and we think that if somebody's team blue, they're our enemy, that's not true. They're not your enemy. Yet now you have political disagreements with them, but they're not your enemy. The enemy are the elites. It is our enemy are the authoritarians that are in power right now, again, on both sides. So to me, I mean, my friend Ross always says the average black man and the average white redneck, if they actually sat down and had a conversation, they would realize that they have more in common than they don't. And what I add to that is exactly what they don't want to happen. That's why you have a lot of these influencers, and a lot of them don't even know they're doing it, but they've been conditioned to think that this is what they're supposed to do. That's why a lot of these influencers are pushing division deliberately. It gets them clout, clicks, and cash. The 3 C's, that's what I call it. When you see people pushing a lot of these divisive messaging and portraying the people that disagree with them as evil, as the devil, they're doing exactly what the authoritarians want. Some of them know it, some of them don't. But I think if enough, it doesn't have to be everybody that wakes up to this, but it has to be enough people to create a breaking point to where we're like, no, screw you. We know what you're doing. Your enemy isn't a Democrat. Your enemy isn't a Republican per se. Your enemy are the authoritarians on both the conservative and progressive sides. There was a reason why there was a point where the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street were actually talking to one another, and they realized, wait, you hate large corporations too? Wait, you hate what the government's doing too? Well, wait a minute. That's not what they wanted. There's a reason why both of those movements crumbled. I'll put my tinfoil hat back on again. That's us coming together and having these conversations is the very last thing that they want to happen, because you can be on the left and still be anti-government and anti-government overreach. You can be on the right and want the exact same thing. It's like you see that what's it called, that little graph where it shows authoritarianism on the top, liberty on the bottom, and you have both the left and right. You have left-wing authoritarians, you have right authoritarians. Matt Walsh. You have left-wing libertarians, right-wing libertarians, which a lot of I think most of the population actually falls into that, and on one level of the spectrum. Most people are not authoritarians, but they don't understand what's going on. I mean,
interesting. I feel the opposite.
Yeah,
I think there's an inner authoritarian in people that you have to be mindful to check. I think we kind of have this thing in us to tell people what to do. And it's kind of what Monterey says all the time. Is like, as a libertarian, he found certain things offensive, but he kind of, but his political ideology is, hey man, if you want to do this over there, cool. Right. And I do think we all have to get to that point. Jeff, man, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really think a lot of people are going to love this podcast. Like, my main demographics is like mid-20s to like mid-40s. So yeah. Before you go, if you wanted to give your Twitter handle out, or if you're working on anything coming up, any plugs you want to make, you definitely make them right now.
Yeah, definitely. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Charles Jr., Jeff Charles Jr. You can read my stuff at redstate.com, Newsweek Opinion, and my Substack is Chasing Liberty. My podcast is A Fresh Perspective. And yeah, I think that's it. Looking forward. This was a really good conversation. Right? I really enjoyed myself. Say it again. Oh, yeah.
You wrote a book.
I'm still finishing it. So it's
okay.
But in the next, I'd say in the next month or so, I should have it out for sale. The book is going to be called Chasing Liberty. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll be able to get updates on that.
All right. Oh, definitely. So I enjoyed the conversation as well. Thank you guys for listening. For those of you viewing the podcast, thank you as well. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Until next time, guys, deuces.